Vitya Diaries Chapter 2, The Favorite. Winter in St. Petersburg was dark. I could handle the cold just fine, and the ice was nothing if not my preferred battleground. But the dark? The unending, relentless dark, it left too much room for the shadows of doubt and memory. It also made it so much harder to get up in the morning. On Saturdays, I left the academy before most of the others were awake. I didn't have classes, and workshops weren't until the afternoon, so it was perfect for one-on-one time with my coach at the skating rink. Who else would venture out so early on the weekend? No one else on the team, that was for sure, even though we were leaving for nationals in less than a week. Felix didn't even stir as I got dressed, stopping to rub the sleep from my eyes again. The window above his bed looked out to the snow-swept streets between the weather-dorm buildings, but this early, and with the cloud cover, there was only the faint glow of a street lamp somewhere below. I left just as some of the other early risers were just starting to poke their heads out of their rooms, wandering to the shared lavatories. Sleeping in was a luxury most of us didn't dare indulge in for too long, not with exams coming up. Junior Nationals was at the same time, so I had no chance for a break. Another reason the dark was unwelcome. It felt like I was sneaking out in the middle of the night as I slipped out into the quiet streets, boots leaving uneven prints in the fresh snow, track bag slung over my shoulder. It wasn't quite 7 a.m., but by the time I made it past the Alexandrinsky and the library, the little cafe next to the bus stop was open anyway. I went in, said my good mornings, and picked out a chocolate chip and coconut oat cookie, and a cup of black tea with lemon. "To go?" asked the girl at the counter, though she knew very well that it was. "Yes, please," I said, and took out the change that was due every Saturday morning, and set it on the counter while she finished ringing it up. "See you next week, Vitya." "Thank you, Manya. And say hello to your coach too, okay?" "Yes, Manya." The snow began to fall again while I waited at the bus stop, sipping the tea from the cup between my mittened hands, cookie safely stowed in the inner pocket of my coat. Aside from the occasional passing car, the world was quiet, all sound muffled by the drifting flecks of white. Then the bus came, loud and rattling, and I climbed inside with a sleepy shuffle, showing my student metro card, and made my way to the back. It was a short ride, but just long enough to get comfortable. It wasn't as if I could watch the metal beast's journey over the bridge or anything. The frozen river was lost to the dark just like everything else, anyway. It was only the fear of dropping the tea that kept me awake enough to not miss my stop. It was too dark. Dark was for sleeping. I hopped off the bus and shook out the warmth from the heater, inviting the cold back in as I got my bearings. But, as usual on mornings when it was dark, and the snow was falling, it turned out to be unnecessary. Coach was waiting for me by the street lamp, one dark, looming figure in the only spot of light in the world. "Morning, Coach," I said. "Good morning, Vitya," he said back. And then, of course, he waited expectantly. I sipped my tea. "You don't have to walk me to the rink, you know." "I know, but how will I get a cookie if I do not?" I made him hold the cup while I got the cookie out, still fresh and warm in its plastic wrap. Then traded it back for my drink. "Here you go, Coach." "You addict." He removed one of his gloves, and grumbled under his breath while he opened the cookie, and broke off a piece, which he offered to me. "Your cookie tax." "PFFT." "Okay." I took it, and nibbled the corner, setting the rest on the lid of my cup. "I'm not going to be responsible for all of these calories. You have to take your share, Vitya." He took a bite, chewed, swallowed, and smiled. It wasn't his favorite cookie, but it was one that he liked, that we both liked, and I liked to surprise him by mixing it up once in a while. He waved me on. "Come along, then, Vitya. We have much to work on before the others arrive." It didn't stop snowing and it didn't stop being dark. Not in St. Petersburg and not in Kazan, which is where nationals were held for the senior level competitors, anyway. Not me. Not yet. I'd been going to nationals ever since my 9th birthday as an assistant to my coach, but this was my last year. My aunt and uncle paid for the flight for my birthday present, and coach let me work off the other expenses: food, travel, hotel, by carrying stuff and making sure the seniors had all that they needed for the competition. We always shared a room, too, so that made it simple. My first flight and first hotel stay was for nationals with coach, way back when. It seemed so long ago, now. How the bed was twice as wide and long as my own back home. How the shower had a glass door and the water came from the ceiling. I'd gotten used to it, traveling all over since then. But it was still fun to be out with Coach. No classes, the buzz of excitement, the press milling around, the other athletes, and breakfast. The only day of the year I liked breakfast. And that was only because Coach took me out, no matter what the weather was, no matter how busy, away from the hotel and all of it, just to spend time with me for a little bit. We got up early, Coach and me, got dressed, and headed out to one of the many secret places that only he knew about. It was usually within walking distance, but sometimes we took a cab, which was fun, too. I almost never got to ride in cars unless Coach was driving. Then he'd get us a booth and we'd sit across from each other, and order the same thing every time: fried egg and kolbasa, blini and cottage cheese, strawberry jam, and tea with rye. Too much. Always too much. But Coach loved it, and I loved it because Coach loved it. He'd ask about school, and I'd tell him that ballet was fine, that homework was boring, and that I couldn't wait to do skating full-time. Then he'd give me a lecture about taking my lessons seriously, and I'd tease him about Lilia, and if they're going to move back in together again. And then he would go over the schedule for the day. It was perfect. "I'll have you on water duty," he said, dropping the crumpled napkin onto his empty plate, then reached over for my remaining piece of bread. "You'll remember to have it ready for the kiss and cry, duh?" "Yeah, I'll remember." "Good." "Hey, Coach, we'll still get breakfast next year, right?" I asked, watching Coach remove his wallet to take care of the bill. "I never paid for breakfast on his birthday, but someday, I'd be able to." "Even though I'll be in the senior division?" he grunted, tapping the plastic card on the tray before the server girl took it away, then looked back at me with a frown. "Vitya," he began to say, hesitated, then shook his head, went about putting on his gloves. "Instead, you'll have a birthday next year, won't you?" "Well, yeah." "Then I think you know what we will do next year, too." Watching Sasha skate was different than the others. Coach had 2 women on his team, 3 men, and 2 pair skate couples, but Sasha was easily the best. He was the only one of the single men that came with us to nationals, but he was all that we needed. Even though he didn't listen in practice, and it always seemed like he was being kind of lazy, once he got in front of an audience, he was really amazing. The hard edges sort of melted away, leaving this bright, smiling figure behind. No one would have ever guessed looking at him on the ice that he was really this huge jerk day to day. We didn't get along at all, but everyone loved him on ice and in interviews. And he was good. After the Grand Prix final, there hadn't been any tears at all. Not from Sasha. He'd simply bowed, gone to the kiss and cry, and waited with Coach for the scores with that grin of amusement on his face. Then, at the podium, standing center, he'd taken the gold without so much as a waver of confidence. Like it was all rehearsed. Of course he was supposed to win gold. He was Sasha Markov, king of Russia's figure skating. King of all men's single skating. He only had 2 real rivals: Karavanov, a fellow Russian, and Stefan Lambiel, a Swiss skater and my idol. Sasha still beat him by a margin of 2 full points. "I'll beat him next year." Coach turned to me, but only for a second before he looked back to the ice, to Sasha. "You're making him your rival?" Maybe it was a bit of a stretch, but I'd won the Junior Grand Prix, and my jumps were already a lot cleaner than his. A lot tighter. All I had to do was get my choreography in check, work on the evolving skate stories, and come up with a routine better than his. That couldn't be too hard. "Yeah, I'll bring back gold. He can bring silver." Duh. Chuckling, Coach put his arm around my shoulders, but kept his gaze fixed on the black lycra suit as Sasha set up for a triple toe loop. "Vitya, finish this season first, then we talk." He landed the jump with beautiful follow-through, leg extended, arms out, gliding backward in an effortless arc that had the crowd fired up. It turned into a step sequence with a changeover, which he carried out to wild applause and the rolling of my eyes. I'd seen the routine 100,000 times before, if they knew how many times he'd flubbed that. And really, it wasn't that impressive. Still, he finished with very few technical flaws and the high score that everyone expected. I waited at the barrier with the water, and offered it to Sasha when he came off the ice. He took one look at the bottle, then one look at me, before turning away and to Coach for the skate guards, ignoring me entirely on his way to the kiss and cry. Coach took the bottle from me, instead, leaving me behind. I was only an assistant, after all, So I watched from the sidelines, behind the press. Sasha kept that same smile. Coach looked proud as ever. He won gold. He took to the podium. He was a natural in the interviews, just as before. He answered each question with the diplomatic responses and little nods, making eye contact, but never giving anything personal away. It was just like he was at the rink, closed off, intensely private but with a shiny wrapper. The media didn't even seem to notice that they weren't getting anything at all from him, and Coach didn't seem to mind, either. He was vague, aloof, but he smiled. That was all they cared about. Sasha, I called after him when he was finished, walking back for his track bag at the bench. Are you ever gonna give a straight answer? Sasha turned his gaze on me, cool as it ever was at our home rink, and blew a puff of air in my face. Maybe if you ever ask the right questions, Viktor. He went back to the bag. Well, why didn't you take the water bottle from me after your free skate? Because, he said, leaving it at that at first, zipping the bag closed and hefting it up onto his shoulder. Then he looked around, squinting as he searched the milling remainder of press and athletes, coaches and family members. I waited for him to continue, setting my jaw, hands on my hips. Well? He angled his hip and let the bag rest on it, leveling a flat stare down at me. Do you really want to know? Yeah, I really wanna know. Fine. Truth is, I'm not here to babysit, Viktor. Babysit? I laughed, and boiled. Excuse me? You're the one who's too good to even take a bottle of water from Coach's assistant. Yakov doesn't need an assistant, Viktor. He brings you along because he wants you to feel involved, but that doesn't mean that I have to play. This is my career, and you're still a kid. Got it? I tried to come up with a good retort, I really did. But Coach called for him before I could, leaving me staring, helpless, and quiet. Sasha, I need you to sign this for tomorrow's show. Sure thing, Coach. Sasha huffed at me again, then patted the top of my head before he walked off to join Coach at the stands. It was silly for Coach to have an assistant at Nationals. It was a much smaller venue than the other ones that we went to, and had everything self-managed already. Sasha was right. It was just an excuse, and I'd probably known that for a long time. But so what? That didn't mean he had to be such a jerk. I watched them talk, Sasha back to his usual self, where neutral was as good as happy, and Coach with the warmth of a grizzly bear, and they went back and forth about whatever and clipped, busy sentences. Short, to the point. Neither of them needed to say much to get talking done. Sasha set the bag down to take the clipboard from him, signed the page, and handed it back. Then, while Coach went over the pages underneath, he tugged the medal out from under his jacket, pulled it off over his head, and folded the ribbon over it. Coach didn't even look at him, just held his hand out for it, like they'd done the exchange 100 times. Sasha handed it over, and picked up the bag again while Coach dropped the medal in his coat pocket. Coach had never asked for any of my medals before. What did that mean? I broached the topic after we got back to the room, showers taken, pajamas on, and Coach was comfortably settled with his vodka and remote to find the best candidate for the soap opera megaverse of the night. Coach. He hummed to show that he was listening, but his focus stayed on the television screen. It would be harder to find something suitable to watch since we were in Russia, but he wasn't one to give up easily. Somewhere, in the vast expanse nearly unwatchable hotel cable, there had to be a foreign language soap to keep us entertained. I threaded fingers through the still damp locks of hair on my shoulder, dark, steely gray with strands of pigment less white, and parting it into 3. Did Sasha give you his medal? Back at the venue, the television screen flickered with each changing channel, casting the room in a kaleidoscope of color. For safekeeping, yes. I watched him drink, staying his hand on the remote to evaluate the actors on screen. Why? I just said, Vitya. Safekeeping. He changed the channel. Americans. I looked back to the TV. English was too easy to follow for Coach. It ruined the game. With a sigh, I began a loose braid. It'd leave my hair wavy by morning, which would be lovely for the trip home, like a princess. Like me. Sasha doesn't like me. Is that so? Yeah. You did say he was your rival. I frowned, twisting a clump of hair around my finger. What's his story? Anyway, Coach, why is he so, grumpy all the time? Did I do something wrong? Coach sighed that time, and set the remote down, relenting with the station back on the American drama. It's not my story to tell, Vitya, but you don't need to worry about it. Look, the Janet is up to something, duh? The blonde woman on screen had an arm full of flowers and a face full of tears. That was certainly something. All right. I wriggled back into the pillows against the headboard and stretched out my leg, toes pointed, and went back to braiding. Coach never answered questions he didn't want to. He was even more tight-lipped than Sasha. She's probably looking for Jennifer or John. Juanita. Asper. Coach chuckled, and poured himself another shot. I was still his favorite.